Last year, more than a third of all US adults used some kind of complementary or alternative medicine. Things like herbs, acupuncture, and other treatments you don't see in most American hospitals. One of the most popular styles of alternative therapies is TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine. People have very different opinions about it. For some, it's all they use. For some, it's potentially dangerous and doesn't have any scientific support. And for others, they judge it on a case-by-case basis and might use it every now and then. There is some science that validates certain TCM practices in specific cases, but most Western scientists say we need more well-designed studies before we can really tell how safe and effective it is. Now, even without strong evidence, TCM is still popular. It's a big part of the official medical system in China, it's taught in multiple universities around the world, and is worth about $60 billion in China alone. It has the blessing of the World Health Organization and multiple insurance companies in the United States, and it dominates the magazine section in the Whole Foods checkout line. So if traditional Chinese medicine doesn't have a strong scientific backing, why is it so popular? And how did we get here? Before we get into the video, I want to be upfront about my personal bias. I don't subscribe to TCM as a system, and that difference of system versus individual treatments is a big deal throughout this video. You couldn't just pick a TCM off the shelf and take it. It's a completely different school of thought to Western medicine, and it includes multiple different remedies. Some of them, like Tai Chi or Qigong, are going to be useful, especially as forms of exercise, but some of them, like eating rhino horn, are straight up quackery. And still some of them have been adopted and tweaked by Western medicine, like cupping has been transformed into myofascial release. The point is, this system is diverse and complicated, and blanket statements about all the TCM branded practices require some more nuance. But the goal of this video isn't to convince you that TCM is pseudoscience. This isn't a debunking video. I want to learn how we got into a situation where so many people around the world believe something that I consider to be untrue. I want to know the context, and I want to understand their backstory. To do that, we need to go back a few thousand years, before the scientific revolution, when medicine was religion. Every culture around the world had their own version of faith healing. Sometime before the Common Era, there was a shift. Health and disease started to be seen as natural, not supernatural. Something, not some god, caused disease. This meant that healers could start to understand what caused disease and come up with remedies. This started traditions of trying out treatments, writing them down, and passing them along so future generations could build on old knowledge. One of these traditions was written into the Huangdi Neijing. This is an early TCM text that came out in about 300 BCE, and it outlined a lot of the core principles of TCM. According to their model, there's this vital life energy called qi that flows through all living things. In the body, qi flows through channels called meridians, from outside the body to inside the body and from organ to organ. Health or illness come from the interaction between yin and yang, the two complementary and opposing forces in the universe, and from the 5 major elements: fire, earth, water, metal, and wood. Each element corresponded to certain organs, and each element supported or weakened another. So you could end up with the spleen ruling over the lungs, and the lungs influencing the skin, and so on. A lot of the ideas behind the TCM model were inspired by ancient Chinese tradition and culture, and one of my past students actually made a video on her channel that goes along with this video about that exact topic. I'll link it up here and then down in the doobly-doo below, but make sure to check that one out after this video. So up until the mid to late 1800s, TCM was probably a better system of medicine than anything you'd find elsewhere, especially when you compare the gentle and non-invasive treatments of TCM to the amputations and surgeries in Victorian England. I mean, neither made a huge positive difference, but at least TCM doctors didn't slice off your leg and give you an infection. But eventually, Western medicine did embrace science with germ theory, anesthesia, and more sanitary surgeries. Over the years, a few Chinese doctors did try to integrate more scientific ideas into the TCM system, but with little success. This is Wang Cheng Ren. In 1797, a plague broke out in his hometown in northern China, which sadly led to the death of multiple children. Many were buried in shallow graves and were dug up and eaten by dogs. This gave Cheng Ren cadavers to study, and as he compared his observations with traditional models, he noticed a couple anatomical differences, especially in the circulatory system. Afterwards, he published one of the first books that formally pushed back against medical tradition. Then, as a result of the Opium Wars in the mid-1800s, more Chinese scholars started questioning the establishment again. On one hand, you had some that wanted to embrace new scientific ideas, and some that wanted to stick to tradition. But in the fall of 1910, an epidemic landed in Manzhouli, a city on the border of China and Russia, and in 4 months it killed 60,000 people. Locals tried to control the plague with vinegar and fireworks, but failed. So they turned to a Western-trained microbiologist named Dr. Wu Lian-te. After performing an autopsy on one of the plague's victims, he found Yersinia pestis, the bacteria that causes plague. His strategy looked familiar. Wear masks, reduce travel, and maybe don't keep that pile of 3,000 dead bodies out in the open. By March of 1911, the plague was gone, and Western medicine gained more credibility. So by the early 20th century, there were 2 medical associations in China, Western and traditional. They mostly coexisted in peace, until the government got involved. Okay, quick, oversimplified version of Chinese government here. For a long time, China was ruled by a series of monarchies called dynasties. There were a bunch of rebellions in the 1800s, a period of warlords, and in 1912, China became a republic. This new government prioritized a healthy populace, so they established China's very first administrative branch ever dedicated to public health. In 1929, an organization of mostly Western-style doctors tried to formally get rid of TCM with a bill called Abolishing Old-Style Medicine to Clear Away the Obstacles to Medicine and Public Health. These Western-style doctors weren't even trying to play nice, so the TCM doctors said, fine, let's see how long you last without us. They held a multi-year-long strike, which shut down clinics and pharmacies. This meant that many Chinese citizens, a lot of them from poor and rural areas, were left with nothing. They didn't have anywhere to go for care. And these were people that didn't have the luxury of believing in Western or traditional style medicine, they just needed something. And at that large a scale, Western-style doctors couldn't train new doctors fast enough to keep up with the need for care. So in 1935, the government did something about it. They resolved to make Western and traditional medicine equal institutions in China. Traditional doctors got a government-sanctioned licensing system, official representation in government, and integration into the school system. It's worth pointing out that this conflict probably wasn't a fight about which medicine was better. Maybe some of it had to do with tradition versus modernity, but also about competition for funding and power. A few years later, China became a communist country under Mao Zedong. Mao famously led a cultural revolution against the old China, tossing out traditional cultural ideals like music, religion, and literature in favor of new, westernized ideals. But traditional medicine survived, somewhat out of necessity. Mao didn't personally believe in TCM, but as China recovered from war, all these traditional doctors were open for business, so they remained an institution because they were so useful. Some Chinese scientists did try to fight back against this system under Mao, but communist dictators tend to get what they want. So we can finally start to answer the question of the video. Why is TCM so popular? Well, because it's a formal branch of medicine in the most populous country in the world. But that's only part of the answer, because eventually, TCM started to spread to Western countries, both as a form of culture and as an alternative medicine. TCM has been in America since Chinese immigrants arrived. It stayed popular within immigrant communities because it was a part of culture, yes, but also because it was really hard to get care anywhere else. They faced language barriers and high prices, but also anti-Asian discrimination and violence, plus Western-style doctors would often flat out refuse to treat Chinese patients. The medical establishment has portrayed immigrants as the other multiple times throughout our country's history. If you want some further reading on this, by the way, I've got some links down in the description. So by the early 20th century, TCM was already in America. It just didn't get much farther than the Chinese community. The big turning point came in 1971, when a New York Times reporter named James Reston was traveling to China with his wife, and all of a sudden, he felt a pain in his abdomen. He needed his appendix removed. He rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors anesthetized him, took out his appendix, and had a normal recovery. Now, to deal with pain after the surgery, TCM doctors set him up with acupuncture. He later wrote about his experience, saying it sent ripples of pain racing through my limbs and at least had the effect of diverting my attention from the distress in my stomach. And it went super mainstream after that. TCM books got translated into English, and schools of traditional Chinese medicine were founded in America. And by 1992, the National Institute of Health started the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine to attempt to research and regulate alternative medicines. In 1994, the FDA passed a law that said herbs, a massive part of TCM, would be classified as supplements, which meant they would bypass the tests that we use to develop drugs. Herbal remedies were going mainstream. Okay, here's the problem with that. If herbal remedies have any kind of pharmacological effect on the body, Western-style doctors still need to learn how they work and interact with the medicines that they're prescribing. And if herbs are harmless, then they're also probably worthless. So we don't want people thinking that they're doing something for their health when in reality, they're just peeing out more turmeric. Basically, there were way too many unknowns flying by without research or scrutiny. TCM kept growing in popularity to the point where some American health insurance companies will even cover acupuncture. And it seems like more companies are getting on board with that in the future. Even as recently as 2019, the World Health Organization included certain TCM treatments in the ICD, or International Classification of Diseases. And that's a big deal because the ICD influences real-life medical treatments, research efforts, and insurance dollars. With a collective blessing from the Chinese and American governments, the World Health Organization, and a lot of the institutions that actually pay for care, you can see why a lot of people consider TCM to be comparable to biology-based medicine. Now, this kind of scholarly analysis is great and everything, but we have to actually talk to people at some point as clinicians, so what do people actually say when you ask them why they like TCM? Contrary to what I thought before researching this video, the #1 reason for using TCM isn't a distrust in Western-style medicine. According to a nationally representative survey from 2002, people believe that their Western medicine will work better if combined with TCM. Plus, they feel more involved and in charge of their treatments. TCM users were more often women, more often wealthier and more educated people, those in overall worse health, and predominantly Asian American. Most of these patients will use Western-style medicine for immediate things like a broken bone or food poisoning, and turn to alternative therapies for more chronic conditions, back pain, headaches, mental health issues. And according to multiple surveys, they like using it. They feel like they're getting a better product from TCM compared to their doctor who is distant, expensive, and only spends 90 seconds with them. And while that doesn't turn acupuncture into a scientifically sound treatment, it does help me understand why somebody would choose it. People have all kinds of reasons why they would choose one treatment style over another. Things like cultural, financial, historical, and of course personal reasons all play a part here. So if we really want to get people on board with evidence-based treatments, we need to understand where they're coming from. If you want to convince somebody that how you think about a thing is the right way, the most effective thing that you can do to win them over is to listen. Before you go, I have a favor to ask. Would you mind sharing this video with someone that you think would like it? This isn't the kind of video that goes viral, and I feel like it could be the kind of video that helps somebody understand a different point of view. So if you would, please share it. Otherwise, make sure to check out the video that Isabel did over on her channel. She's new to educational YouTube, but she's already crushing it. Her channel is linked up here. Otherwise, thank you to my patrons. They support me with money, but if you want to support me for free, then make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the bell so you get notified when I post a new video. Have fun, be good. See you next time.